Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki a hau, tihei Māori ora. You should do something else. You should do anything else. Some of you might have heard that from people in your lives about a desire you have for a creative career. Maybe you've thought it yourself, on a bad day, in the quiet after a bad audition or a bad rehearsal, or a moment when the whole thing feels a bit absurd or out of reach. Doubt can be the inevitable companion to the acts of bravery you all undertake by putting yourselves out there through your work. I heard it when I was at high school back in the 1800s. I was good at drama, English, and debating. Back in the dark ages in New Zealand, what you did with those things was not become an actor or a writer. You went to law school. So that is what I did. I started a law degree and a politics degree, and it wasn't for me. I was miserable. I experienced my first major depressive episode. Depression is something I have lived with and managed ever since. After 2 years, I had the sense to leave, and then spent 5 years finding my way through a Bachelor of Arts. You do the maths, they're only meant to take 3. I accrued majors more or less by accident, and I ended up with 1 in politics and 1 in screen and media. It's the screen and media major that has served me most. I didn't know it at the time, but it has given me the spine of everything I've done since. Artistic and creative output is how I come to understand what moves me and what I care about. Observing the response to it from others is how I came to understand what audiences care about and value. Just as importantly, it taught me how to read the world, how it reflects the zeitgeist and cultural shifts, how to understand who is making and shaping the culture around you, and what their choices reveal about where power sits. The theme for this year's National Youth Drama School is power, and I want to talk to you about that. Your power, the power of the arts and creativity, the power of being curious about others, and the power of saying yes. First, let me start with a different kind of power, not Dame Jacinda Ardern's memoir, although it's related, but the power that politicians wield. We are living through extraordinary times, as Ben made reference to. It can feel like there is a concerted effort to dismiss and diminish the things that the arts do, to characterise empathy as weakness, to treat intellectual inquiry as elitism, to suggest that the vast body of human understanding that has accumulated over thousands of years of art, storytelling, and people making things to express what it means to be alive is somehow optional, a nice to have, a luxury, possibly even suspect. We see it in funding cuts. We see it in the language used by some to describe arts organisations and artists themselves. We see it in a broader cultural shift that is hostile to complexity and very comfortable with the idea that some truths, whether they are scientific, factual, or the kind of truth that only art can tell you, simply do not matter. I think this happens for a reason. I think it happens because that kind of truth can be threatening to a certain kind of power. Art builds empathy. It forces you to inhabit lives that aren't yours, to feel things you haven't personally experienced, to understand people whose circumstances are radically different from your own. That breeds a muscle that isn't vulnerable to fear and division. It means that what you are doing here this week is not just personally enriching or professionally useful. It is significant and important beyond this week and beyond these walls. I first remember coming face to face with the power of the performing arts at age 7. My parents took me to see Cats at the St James Theatre in Auckland. It is objectively a weird musical. People pretend to be cats. There's a cat that has a job on the railways. There's a lot of spandex. The plot involves a cat ascending to the afterlife. And I was absolutely destroyed by it. I was 7, so I hope I can get a pass from you for feeling like that about cats. Something happened to me that I did not have words for at age 7. The voices, the bodies, and the sheer physical act of people on stage doing something extraordinary with themselves in front of me. I didn't speak all the way home on the drive back to Hamilton. Just a strange little mute child in the back seat. Nothing was wrong, I just needed to stay inside whatever had happened to me for a while longer. That response has never gone away. I don't like to go to galleries with other people. Just ask my husband, who has been to galleries with me and probably won't do it again. I don't like to talk immediately after I've seen something that has really grabbed me. It took me years to understand that this is not antisocial behaviour. It is how my body processes something that has landed somewhere very deep. I remember thinking about that little musical theatre nerd after seeing Shane Bosch's production of Angels in America for Silo Theatre. Angels in America is one of the great works of the 20th century. Tony Kushner wrote it in the early 90s during the AIDS crisis about America. It's also about power, what we owe each other and what we believe when there is nothing left to believe in. It is ferocious, heartbreaking, and to me, a person who has come to think about theatre as a kind of church, genuinely holy. After 6 hours of sitting in the dark by myself, watching that work, I went to my car, sat in it alone, and cried for 15 minutes. I tell you this because it is the truest thing I can say about what performance does that nothing else can for me. It reaches something in me that bypasses the part of my brain that is busy analysing and being rational. It just gets in there without asking permission. That is power. My university study, my long, rambling university study, eventually led me to something I hadn't known existed as a specialty: arts marketing, how you connect the work and the people making it with an audience. I did an internship at Auckland Theatre Company as part of my qualification. I was given a phone book on my first day. That's a literal printed book the size of a brick with names and phone numbers in it. My job was to cold call businesses and compile a database of those who might be interested in corporate packages for ATC's end-of-year musical that year, The Rocky Horror Show. I did not know what I was doing. I was very lonely. A particularly anguished diary entry at the time refers to the possibility of me being eaten by dogs and no one noticing for 3 days. But I was curious about everything. Curious about the mechanics of how a script becomes a production, about the vast range of people involved in that process, about why some production filled houses and some didn't. I was given opportunities to be involved in all aspects of preparing for that show, and I said yes, even when I was scared witless. I returned to ATC a few years later as their partnerships coordinator. My unpaid internship paid off. I did not entirely know what a partnerships coordinator did. It turned out to be a person who helped raise money from funders, sponsors, and patrons, and the person who carried boxes of sponsor wine up and down 3 flights of stairs in a building that had no lift many, many times. I learned from people who had started working in the theatre as an assistant stage manager and had risen to become artistic director of the company. I learned not to complain about doing grunt work. I also learned an enormous amount about the pointy end of the arts business, and that the people who did finish their law degrees are integral to the arts as patrons of it. I learned to ask for money, and that the worst thing someone can say is no, and that won't kill you. I learned about the ecosystem of theatre in Auckland and arts funding in this country. It was a behind-the-scenes role with an incredible view. I also witnessed some of the most extraordinary opening nights. The feeling in the foyer after a great show is something I became addicted to. Watching people who had never been to the theatre before, who had come because their company had a sponsorship package, who probably didn't want to be there when they first arrived, have one of the best nights of their lives. People who went on to become regular theatre goers. People who became converted to the Church of Theatre. The power of watching something shift in a person in real time, watching people react and respond, and being curious about why is the through line in my career. I eventually dipped out of the arts sector to take a job at a bank. I have a philosophy of saying yes to things more often than I say no, and I figured I could learn a thing or two. Unfortunately, I haven't remembered anything useful about finances. I say yes to things more often than I say no because I have found that the things I understand least going in are often the things that teach me the most. I ran social media at the bank. I had started ATC's social and was an early adopter of it. This was 2011. A lot has changed, but I was fascinated by what it might mean to be able to have a direct relationship with an audience that wasn't intermediated by traditional gatekeepers. Much like trying to understand why people respond to a play in the minutes after, I wanted to understand the mechanics of why people liked, shared, and subscribed. It also made me tough and pretty resilient. Shockingly, people don't really like banks, and I was on the end of some of the worst words you can imagine. Somewhere in that period, I also worked out that I could write. I'd always had thoughts I was trying to get out while making sense of the world, and I've always had strongly held opinions. But what sharpened it into something I could do professionally was discovering what it felt like to write something that other people recognised as theirs. What has driven me most as a writer is the privilege of having a platform to say something that other people are thinking or feeling, but don't have a space or place to put into words. There is a kind of collaboration that happens when you write something and someone reads it and says, yes, that's exactly it. That response matters more to me than almost anything else a piece of writing can do. Writing taught me a great deal about audiences long before I had the professional language for it. I'm an audience strategist now, yet another job title that my parents don't know how to explain to people what it is that I do. I work with organisations trying to understand how they reach people, why some things find audiences and others don't. I teach them that audiences hold extraordinary power and have no obligation to pay attention to anything you do. I help them find the difference between producing work and actually connecting with the people it's made for. I use a lot of hard data to find insights. I am constantly learning about new technical details and tools, but I also use a lot of gut instinct and all the lessons I have learned over my career. More than anything, I lean into curiosity. I don't look inwards, I look up and out. I say yes to doing things like this because it will propel me somewhere where I don't know. I was head of audience at strategy at the Spin-Off for a few years up until 2 weeks ago, and I had the great privilege of hiring Ben and working with Ben in my time there. I've left to work for myself, which has meant thinking very hard about what skills are actually valuable in this specific moment. What I keep coming back to is this. The skills you are developing here are more valuable now than at almost any other point in the history of the career market. AI is handling more and more of the cognitive, analytical, and transactional work that used to define large portions of my professional life. It does things faster than people can, in some cases, and competently most of the time. Here's where creative power becomes something entirely different. The thing AI cannot do is what you are learning to do this week. It cannot read a room. It cannot build a set or sweep a stage. It cannot feel the moment an audience tips from attention to absorption. It cannot embody something. It cannot make a person in the back row feel that what is happening on stage is happening specifically for them. It can generate, it cannot connect. You are learning presence, the ability to hold attention without demanding it, to earn it, keep it, and make someone feel that looking at you and listening to you is worthwhile. That is the core of human connection. You are learning to tell stories that are true, even when they're made up. What the greatest art does is take something specific and find inside it the thing that belongs to everyone. Drama is not lying. It is finding the version of experience that everyone recognises. This week, learn everything you can. Push on the things that are difficult. Pay attention to the moments when something clicks, when you feel the room change, when something you do lands somewhere you didn't predict. Notice that. It will serve you for the rest of your life. Over the course of this week, you are also finding out something about your own power, what you are capable of, what you can build, what you feel when you inhabit something other than yourself, and discover from the inside what that reveals. That is not a soft skill. That is one of the hardest and most sophisticated things a human being can do. Empathy, complexity, the willingness to hold more than one truth at a time, the capacity to understand that other people's experiences are as real and as valid as your own. An arts education, including this week at the National Youth Drama School, is not a nice to have or a luxury. It's needed now more than ever before. You should do something else. You should do anything else. You should do everything else. Learn to do a whole lot of things. Be curious. Say yes. The antidote to the times we live in is to keep doing this. You are the antidote. That is the power sitting in this room. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.